Chinese President Xi Jinping has met former Taiwanese President Ma Ying-jeou in Beijing, a landmark event during which both men urged the peaceful resolution of differences. The meeting comes just weeks before Taiwan swears in a new leader that Beijing openly dislikes. Mr. Ma, a proponent of closer ties with China and a senior member of Taiwan's main opposition party, the Kuomintang, is on an 11-day tour across the country. It's the first time a former leader of Taiwan has been hosted by China's top leader in Beijing since the Kuomintang fled to Taipei in 1949. It's also the first meeting between Mr. Xi and Mr. Ma since their historic summit in Singapore in 2015. And our correspondents are live with more details. Deborah Wong is standing by in Hong Kong with Victoria Jen in Taiwan. Let's get to Deborah first. Deborah, details of that meeting between Mr. Xi and Mr. Ma that broke on Chinese state media. Just what kind of message is China sending?
Well, only the first few minutes of the meeting were open to the press, but it was enough to sort of gauge the almost friendly tone that the both leaders were promoting during the meeting. So Mr. Xi told Mr. Ma that China and Taiwan may have quite different political systems, but fundamentally they are one country and that they will continue to seek unification despite foreign interference. Now, Mr. Xi also said that there was no problem that could not be resolved and that both sides should resolutely oppose Taiwan independence as well as separatist activities. Mr. Ma, on the other hand, also agreed, saying that war would be unbearable. Now, the meeting is significant as it's the first time Chinese leadership has met with a former or serving leader in Taiwan in Beijing, and it's taking place amid quite frosty cross-strait ties. Now, Mr. Ma still holds considerable political sway in Taiwan as a former president, as well as currently a senior member of the more Beijing-friendly Kuomintang party. And, Mr. Xi's meeting with him highlights that political dialogue between China and Taiwan still is possible if both sides accept the 1992 consensus. Now, that is something that the ruling DPP government has refused to accept, and so there has not been any high-level talks between Taiwan and China since the DPP came into power in 2016. But, the meeting also signals that Beijing is willing to keep the door open, but it means it's keeping the door open just on its terms because it comes as China renews calls during the recent two sessions, as well as in today's meeting, to promote more business as well as cultural cross-exchanges between China and Taiwan, as well as to foster a better understanding of Chinese history across the strait, especially among the Taiwan youth. Now, timing is everything as well, because this year is a year where China and the US marked 45 years of formal ties. And although both sides agree that diplomacy is necessary to prevent any further escalation of conflict, it hasn't quite translated to action, because we've seen in the last couple of months China reiterating its stance that Taiwan is the red line that US shouldn't be crossing, and that both sides also traded quite harsh words against election interference during Taiwan's most recent presidential polls. Now, the Xi-Ma meeting was also meant to take place earlier this week, but it was postponed to today because we heard that they wanted to actually coincide the meeting the meeting that where US, Philippines and Japan leaders will actually be meeting to discuss security issues in the South China Sea. So US President Joe Biden will also be meeting Japanese PM Fumio Kishida, where both sides will also be sharing concerns on China. So really the meeting is also a message that China is hoping to send, showing that political dialogue is the way to go and that it is prioritizing diplomacy over aggression. Back to you.
Thanks, Deborah. Deborah Wong in Hong Kong will be looking, of course, at that bilateral US-Japan summit first, later in the bulletin, and, of course, Philippines, US and Japan trilateral summit later on as well on this bulletin.
Well, let's go and get now to Victoria Jen. She is in Taipei. Vic, what's the significance of this meeting for Taiwan?
Well, unlike the previous summit, Ma Ying-jeou is no longer the president or holding any official position in the opposition Kuomintang. And so the meeting is more symbolic than anything else. It also ironically coincides with the 45th anniversary of Taiwan's Relations Act. Now, but one thing is certain is that Ma Ying-jeou is trying to play a peacemaker in the cross-strait relations. He upholds the 1992 consensus, which is something that Beijing considers to be the foundation for peaceful cross-strait relations and also the precondition for the two sides to resume dialogues. And so analysts are saying that this is a clear message from Beijing that to Taiwan that anyone who accepts the 1992 consensus, there would be room for negotiation. But so far, as long as the ruling DPP rejects the 1992 consensus, analysts are saying that there is very little room for negotiations or to resume dialogues on both sides, because in fact we have already seen tensions rising across the Taiwan Strait since William Lai won the presidency in January. William Lai is considered by Beijing as a separatist, a troublemaker for his hardline pro-independence position. And since his victory in January, we have already seen China turning up the heat on Taiwan. So with Ma Ying-jeou and Xi Jinping's meeting, we're still likely to see cross-strait relations further deteriorate under Lai's leadership unless he accepts the 1992 consensus. Back to you.
Victoria, thank you very much for that. Victoria Jen there in Taipei.